They believe in it. Other end, active anti-union members. These aren't people who are in the opposition bloc or something in your local. Just because they don't like you doesn't mean that they're anti-union. Anti-union members are people who want to decertify the union and are working to do it. And you know what? In the average local, there's nobody doing that. Almost nobody. It's rare. Inactive anti-union members, they're people who like to make it a non-union workplace, but they're not motivated to do it. So they're not actually doing anything. And in the middle, there's the friendly middle that are approachable, the disengaged middle. Often they've got a million other things in their life and it's simply not possible. Or they're just in another zone or planet. Unfriendly, that's people they don't know, they're not engaged, they really don't want to talk to you. And when I ask people, when I do this exercise, I put them in groups and say, where should you start? Almost everybody wants to start in the middle. And there's a whole school of progressive trade unionism that's all about getting out to the middle and talking to the members without a plan. So a big part of my message is, this is where the work must begin. This is where the work must begin. The local union executive board. The local union executive board working with senior bodies. So that whatever else happens on this spectrum, it's done with a plan. Most locals don't have a plan. The employer has a plan. So this campaign planning handbook, all those exercises in there work for making a local union plan, just like they work for making a campaign plan. So this is really where it starts. Often we get this sending activists into the workplace in a way that is not organized. We're organized labor. That's what we're about. And there was actually a theme in CUPE. I was on the National Executive Board of CUPE years ago. We called a campaign we ran, Organize the Organized. Everybody wanted to go off and organize somebody else. Well, we weren't really organized. We paid our dues. And what differentiates a unionized workplace from a non-unionized workplace should be that it's an organized workforce. That there's actually organization in the workplace. Now I'm going to go to my presentation. See which button I'm supposed to push. That's the take a look at the 5-step guide. It's in your kit. I'm not now, okay? Sorry, gonna lose you. It applies to almost any campaign. Here we go. I first did this exercise with hospital workers up in Sudbury. I got there early in the morning, before the session started, and they were all talking about a guy called Benny. Benny said this, Benny said that, Benny said the other thing. Oh, somebody said, I was talking to Benny last night. Somebody else said, well, I was talking to Benny this morning. This morning. Oh. So, of course I said, who's Benny? And they looked at me as if to say, who are you? You don't know who Benny is? You don't talk to Benny. I said, who's Benny? Benny's the Director of Human Resources. Benny was probably the most important person in their world. They spent quality time with Benny. He's the boss, basically. So I got out my felt marker and started drawing, okay? So, on the left are the members. See if I can get this. little closer to me. Any magic? Okay. On the left are the members. On the right is the employer. In the middle is the union organization. The union organization is the executive board, the shop stewards, committees, etc. I just draw it there because this is about relationships. And one of my theories is that we cannot change the relationship of the union organization to the members unless we change the relationship of the union organization with the employer first. That in some ways the DNA, a major determining factor that we never talk about, is the relationship of the union to the employer. I gotta do this really fast, folks. You can spend a whole afternoon on this one. Those arrows represent the interactions between the union organization and the employer. They're constant, they take up a tremendous amount of time. This is quality time. A lot of this is face-to-face time. Meetings, phone calls, a lot of correspondence. It's two-way, it's a lot. This is a worst-case scenario, but in a lot of unions, the relationship between the union organization and the members, apart from the members that are in deep doo-doo all the time, who also take time, but with a typical member who gets up in the morning, goes to work, etc., our relationship with them can be rather thin. So that dotted line with the arrow on one end shows communication that isn't all that frequent. It's not very good quality communication because it's mostly going one way. Not that good. So the union can actually end up, I'm talking worst case scenarios here, I know it doesn't apply to your union in any way at all, but worst case scenario, the union ends up in a bubble with the employer. And doesn't mean they're bad people. But one thing the members know is it's not in the workplace. Or to a large extent, it's not in the workplace. Well, where are they? Often they're meeting with the employer. And we have to meet with the employer. We have to do these things. See those two vertical lines right here? When I'm doing this with a felt marker, I can draw these really dramatically, like this. The disconnect between the union and the membership. There's hardly a union, there's hardly a union anywhere, and it varies from local to local. Right now, at this point in history, where there isn't some kind of pretty serious disconnect between the union and the membership. And whether it's a bit of a problem or a huge problem, it's one of the first things that we face when we go out to build a campaign. What are we going to do about it? And the employer isn't off snoozing someplace. You notice there's a smile at the top and fangs at the bottom? That's the good cop, bad cop. And they are trained. They are trained in the good cop, bad cop. They're trashing your collective agreement, and they've got their supervisors out on the floor saying, how's the little fella's soccer game going? You know? Oh, blah, blah, blah. Nice to see you back, you know? By the way, we kept track of every minute you were gone, you know? And they have experts, consultants, who train them in this stuff. It's called engagement. So, you know, the union talked about member engagement. The employer talks about worker engagement. And they've got all kinds of things, you know, little gym bags and bric-a-brac and contests and, you know, suggestion plans and every other thing you can imagine to rope you in. I've got a new set of these slides that I don't have them in slide form yet. There's a second set of arrows directed at the union, because they work our union leaders all the time. Most unions, they're working all the time to build personal relationships. Because what they figured out is, if you feel safe with that person across the table, and they're not usually evil people, If you feel safe with that person across the table, you feel safe with the employer. It's not logical, but what they found out is it works. And so if they create comfort in that room, and they do it intentionally, they can disarm us. Meanwhile, what do we see? That those sort of battleship-looking things, we're under attack. The greed of the 1%, globalization, neoliberal ideology, union busting, cuts to public services, anti-union media. They are coming after us big time. Now, anybody want to comment on this? Am I from another planet?
No, the visual is excellent. It really is excellent. It's exactly how it is.
Seems a little bit familiar, maybe?
Bang
on. Okay. Seems a little bit familiar. A key piece in here is that this isn't a scenario that bad union leaders decided they wanted to do. This isn't something like, these are good people who get doing all this work on behalf of the union. And again, I want to underline, this is a worst case scenario that I'm drawing here. This, pardon me?
It's the
No,
it's a reality.
It's a reality, okay. Our unions formed as we know them now. Often they go back, 100 years. But our current model of unionism, in many ways, formed in the 1950s and the 1960s. We didn't write the script. We joined the union, we became active trade unionists, and we inherited a model of unionism. And many of us, over the years, have fought in different ways to make our union stronger, to make it more militant. One of the things that we've had is social unionism, a focus on the community. This is a good thing. However, I was among people in CUPE who fought that model, not because we wanted to have our union have a narrow perspective on the world. We wanted our union to be part of a big labor movement and a powerful progressive political movement. But because what happened in our unions and what happened to the left in our unions to a large extent is that we were given a sandbox to play in. And we were given a certain amount of money and a lot of buttons for our jackets. I've been out there for years, a gazillion buttons and a bandana and an armband and the whole shebang. But where we really were in a lot of this, if I could draw right now, a parade along here someplace, almost off the page. We focused on the policy binders. And we've got the most progressive policy binders, I think, of any union in the world. But now we're under attack. And those policy binders, we can't pile them up and turn them into barricades in the street. It's good to have them. Maybe we should. There's enough of them, it might work. So, this model of trade unionism grew in a period of relative class peace following World War II. The 1%, the rich and powerful in the country, they didn't want to see, they got a few of their own geniuses, they didn't want to see revolution following World War II. Following World War I, all hell broke loose all over the world. Following World War II, what we now call the multinationals, they were driven out of much of the world. Whatever we might think of what replaced them, they got driven out of Eastern Europe, they got driven out of China, they got driven out of countries all over the world. The big imperial powers took a beating, anti-colonial struggle happening all over the place, people throwing out, the Brits and the Portuguese and whomever else had been ruling the world. So this was a time of upheaval, and so too in Canada. The labor movement was powerful. The labor movement had shown what it could do in the 30s. The troops coming home after World War I were radicalized by what they heard and what they experienced in Europe, and the troops coming home from World War II were feared. And they brought a lot of solidarity into the workplace. And there was a strike wave following World War II, as we know. And so it was decided, and there's no name for this, but there was really in effect, a social contract, a class truce between the rich and powerful and working people in the country. And the social agreement or consensus was that the standard of living of workers should gradually rise, and that workers should be more or less treated fairly. And we would go in and we would invoke that. We would say, you know, you've got to treat workers fairly. Our standard of living has to rise, not hugely, but we've got to see some improvement. And for years, we were able to go into that bubble and go to the employer, and we'd have some scraps, CUPW more than others. There were scraps and battles, no question about it. There was an element of struggle, but we were able to go in there and we were able to produce results for our members with very infrequent engagement on their part. We were able to go in there and we would do comparison bargaining, and we had stacks of research and everything else, and we'd go in there and we'd show them, this is the pattern, this is the amount, and everything else. And we produced pretty good results with that. We're still in there making the case, but we're spending, in many places, people tell me they're spending more time in the bubble, and they're getting fewer and fewer results. You can see it. We're hurting badly. And so our challenge now, we have to reorganize under fire. So we're under fire. How do we create a situation in which there's adequate, because that's where the resources are, that's where the union resources are. You know, the anti-Hudak campaign, I'll come to you in a minute, brother. The anti-Hudak campaign, we went across the province and we fought. I mean, he could have won. At one point, he was up right up there with the other parties. And we had a lot of success, but you know what? 95%, I would say, of union resources in this province, it was business as usual during that whole period. We did our best with the 5% we could bring alive and put to work. How could it possibly be that the overwhelming majority of the union's resources are not devoted to meeting the attack? And so now, in a campaign, one of the big fights is to say, it can't be left to the political action committee, or political action committees. It can't be left to the activists. This must be the work of the entire union. How do we create a situation in which the leadership really gets it and says, hey, we're in the fight of our lives here. CUPW is in the fight of its life right now. It's in the fight of its life. And the focus, I would say, you need a war room. You need full-time staff doing absolutely nothing else. It's battle stations. Should be everywhere. And it's necessary to break out of this bubble because, you know, finding funds is not, funds are just one type of resource. How do you find resources? Do you know what we did in CUPE years ago? We had a big fight with them. I won't tell you what it was about because it's too complicated. And I facilitated those planning sessions, CUPE Ontario. And I used this exercise. And we identified it as a problem, and then we found a way to turn this bad situation into a good situation. And do you know what happened all across the province? Because in CUPE, it's mostly staff reps. Not mostly, but often. I shouldn't say mostly. Often it's staff reps. The staff reps went into the employer and said, you know what? We don't have time to meet with you. We're organizing an illegal province-wide strike against this legislation. Municipalities, big and small, all across the province, the phone started ringing. Somebody in Human Resources phones up the CEO and says, my God, the CUPE rep just walked in here and said they weren't meeting with us because they're out organizing a general strike. Not a bad idea, because it was normal. Here was CUPE facing the biggest attack that it had ever faced, and in the room with the employer, it was all normal. Shouldn't be. Shouldn't be normal with the employer, shouldn't be normal with the members, shouldn't be normal with the community. Okay. We're doing okay. Are we doing okay?
Yeah, you're doing great.
Are we on topic?
Fantastic.
Adequately? Yep. Okay. So, I would again suggest you take a look at the Achieving a State of Readiness document. And sometimes it's very brief, okay? And these documents, we write them, there has, I can't always say exactly what I think, but I do my best, okay? We can't let that good cop, bad cop, employer propaganda stuff go unchallenged in our workplaces. We've got to get out of that bubble. Consultation is a form of counterinsurgency. Consultation is used against us. We're reasonable people. We want to be consulted. Keep them talking is the oldest trick in the book. And there are people who will keep on consulting and consulting and consulting and consulting right into the grave, right into the pit. Oh, that's a really good idea, Rob. That's very interesting. Yeah, we'll think about that, By the way, here's your pink slip, buddy. So these things don't happen by accident. And you see where the union organization has moved. It's moved over where the members are. And guess what? As we know, when we think back in history, this is where the union started. This is where the union existed. And we migrated. There are some places, and I'm not going to name any names, but there's some major unions who've basically surrendered the workplace to the employer. And to the extent that the union exists in the workplace, it's in a co-management function. I don't know if you have this or not, but when a worker starts causing trouble about something, guess who shows up? The supervisor, shop steward team. So we understand, you're causing some trouble. My name's Bob, I'm here to represent you. And I'm here with your supervisor, and between the two of us, we're gonna solve this problem. You. There's a lot of that going on out there. There's a lot of that going on out there. When I started in CUPE Local 1 at Toronto Hydro in 1972, the union didn't have an office. We had about 1,200 members. There was no office. It was all, every union officer had a big briefcase, and we all had our briefcases in our lockers. And that's the union president, I don't believe in this, but the union president, Brother Baker, who walked like this, he what was I going to tell you about Brother Baker? He went to work every day, almost every day. Now, you can't run a union like that nowadays, but he was on the job. And he used to come in the truck to where I was working, because I worked as a laborer for the first 10 years I was there. He would come to the job in his truck, his bucket truck, get me out of the ditch I was digging, put me in the truck, and we'd go downtown, and he'd give the boss a blast. Then they'd drive me back out to the work site, he'd go back to work, and we could shut that place down. We shut it down all the time. We shut it down all the time. So we're not gonna go back to those days, but we need a union organization in the workplace that's really powerful. And in this diagram, you can see that those individual dots that I had drawn are now connected with these arrows. Because the union, and they're connected to the union organization. Because we've actually got an organization in the workplace. I don't know to what extent you have an organization in the workplace. I don't know to what extent the health and safety people in the workplace talk to the shop stewards in the workplace, talk to the committee people in the workplace. I don't know. But a lot of unions don't have a workplace organization anymore. And so when we go out into the workplace to engage members, it's tough. So I'm going to say something about that. I've done a lot of work with QB 4400. That's the place where we had that was the school board workers in Toronto. I worked with them for 15 years or something like that, on and off. And we had two big strikes, the school strikes in Toronto in '99 and 2001. That's the one I was talking about, 600 picket captains. Wild, absolutely wild. We had something called the 3-visit rule. They did not have a strong workplace organization. We had something called the 3-visit rule. And we trained all the people we sent into those workplaces, because we said, you know, we have to, before going on strike, we want everyone to know who is their picket captain, and everybody's going to know each other. These aren't just going to be names on a list, because we know there has to be that personal loyalty. It's like the platoon in battle. They're not fighting for the queen anymore. They're looking out for each other. People, we have to build those ties and build that interconnectedness. And the 3-visit rule was, the first 2 visits, you'll listen. If you haven't been there for a while, just go and listen. Because they have stuff they want to tell you. And when I ask leaders who admit to being here back in the bubble slide, it's a lot more comfortable meeting with the employer than it is going out into the workplace and talking with the members. Way more comfortable. How would you rather spend your afternoon? That's a no-brainer. You go into the workplace, you know, there's the boot allowance grievance that's been sitting somewhere for 4 years. You don't know where it went. There's a huge amount of stuff. You got to go in there with a notebook. We made a form, created a form, and if you ever write a person's name on a form, you got to make sure that you get back to them. And when we sent people out in the workplace, they had to write down what the members were talking about, what they were saying, what their problems were. And then we had to set something up to try to deal with it. And we trained people in listening, that it's actually a meditation, that you actually have to slow your own brain down so that you can say, what's going on with this person? And when people are charged and have resentment, they can't hear you. And I don't know if any of you have ever been to a workshop I've done where the first question I ask, I did do a little thing on listening. And it's, why are trade unionists bad listeners? And usually we are. Not all of us. Sorry to the good listeners in the crowd. But we've got information that the members need to hear. And so we go into the workplace and we say, hi, how are you? You know, the blah, 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 and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. Don't you realize that, you know? And it's a struggle for us. We actually have to learn to listen, most of us. Because our brain, there's a joke about, can I remember the joke? What's the opposite of talking?
Listening.
Waiting. Waiting to talk. Often when we're not talking, we're just waiting to talk. This might, I got in there. So, a 3-visit rule, and it was on the 3rd visit that you'd hear And we often think we gotta tell them, but we don't know. We don't know what they're thinking about. We don't know what they care about. We don't know how they're feeling. We don't know what's going on in their life. We're just really just, you know what they call it, the park and bark. They call it the park and bark. So when we do this work in the workplace, we actually have to get to know people. We actually have to find out what they're thinking. We actually have to address their concerns. They've often got a legitimate beef. They need to be heard. Once they're heard, then you can start having a conversation. There's a lot of unions where the culture is that the leadership is angry at the members. And the members are angry at the leaders. That's dysfunction. That's like an unhappy home. We're all angry. We're all disappointed in each other. When my old local was in, when Toronto Hydro was amalgamated a number of years ago, and there were like 4 different unions who wanted to be the union for the new amalgamated electrical utility, Toronto Hydro, my old local, the people who were designated to do this work, it wasn't that hard. They only had like 1,000, 1,200 members. They had a 7-visit rule. They said, it wasn't just their own members, it was the members in all these other utilities who were gonna vote on the representation vote about who was gonna represent them. We're gonna visit each workplace 7 times. We're gonna try and talk to each member 7 times. We're gonna get to know who's who. We're gonna listen, we're gonna build connections. Guess who won the vote? They creamed everybody else. No brainer. That's what it actually takes. That's really what it actually takes. And I'd say this from an equity point of view. Anybody doing this work needs equity training. I know London's not as diverse as Toronto is, but it is a fact that when somebody like me walks into a workplace, I will tend to gravitate to my peers. I will tend to gravitate to old white guys, all of whom claim to be straight. You know, that's who I'm going to tend, that's who I'm going to tend to gravitate to. And to break that pattern of behavior, we actually have to become more self-aware. And usually that process of becoming more self-aware involves some specialized training. Question, brother, you had a question a moment ago.
Well, just quickly, I mean, when you talk about what happened after the Second World War, I'm thinking of the increased bureaucratization of the union movement that under William Lyon Mackenzie King, you have the Order in Council PC 1003, and then you have the Industrial Relations Dispute Investigation Act, okay? So what happens is that unions now, there's a law which requires the employer to negotiate with the union if that union has been certified by people in the workplace, but in exchange for that security and the job security that union activists received as a result of that, there were certain compromises that were struck, all right? So no longer are there any sympathy strikes. You now have management rights. The grievance procedure is bureaucratized, so it's simply a question of paperwork. Okay, union certification is also bureaucratized. You simply sign a card. There's no longer what I would refer to as Norma Ray moments. You remember the movie Norma Ray where they're going to force her out of the factory and she gets up on top of that table, scrolls the sign union, and everybody just shuts the place down? That's illegal now. All right, so there was, and also, I mean, there was the sense in which we surrendered our militancy for job security as far as the unions were concerned. And at the same time, we used McCarthyism in order to destroy the communist-based unions. All right, so the United Electrical Workers under C.S. Jackson, the Mine, Mill, and Smelters Workers Union, International Woodworkers of America, shop stewards in UAW here in Canada. I mean, they're all driven out of the union movement. The Siemens Union is mobbed up, all right? So, and to a certain extent, the union movement was used against the communist unions here in Canada, the steel workers, the CCF. So that's what happened to our militancy.
Big part of it. And I went very quickly through that period of history, and I share your analysis. I share your analysis. That there was a very seamy side to the deal. And it was, we will not only be loyal subjects, we will hand over those amongst us who might cause you trouble. And the McCarthy period, by the way, started in Canada. It actually, the witch hunt, which extended into our unions, started before the McCarthy hearings in the United States, on the pretext of this guy Guzhenko. So my dad got run out of Montreal. That's why I was born in Toronto. So let me thank you for that. It's important, that history. It's important. I skipped over it, but it's very, very important. So this slide shows the union heading for the workplace in a big, big way, and organizing the organized, and redefining its relationship with the employer. There needs to be a separation. This line here is actually a class line, and it should be clear as a bell. If we go back to the previous slide where the union's in a bubble with the employer, that line, that separation is actually in a different place and the union's on the wrong side of it. Sometimes. So, in this slide, this is about strengthening ties with allies. And that was one of the questions. And this shows union members as a key piece in this. Often, our alliances are formed at the top. Leaders talk to leaders. A great thing about labor councils, a shortcoming of labor councils, is often we don't get the people in the room who've actually got the power. So we should have local union presidents in labor council meetings, and often we don't have them. They can kind of duck out. The great news is we do have activists there. We have some leaders. And those personal connections are absolutely critical. And there's increasingly, there's an awareness in the labor movement that we build some of our best community ties through union members. And we're talking about social media, there are actually programs which allow you, I don't know how I feel about this, but to actually gather data about members so that you, not about all those other things, but about, if they belong to a faith community, if they're in a housing co-op, if they're on the executive board of a housing co-op, if they're in Pee-wee hockey. People have all kinds of community connections, and often we think in very narrow terms. But our members are our strength. That's what we're about. We're a membership organization, and our members have skills and power, as we know. So much of that outreach really should happen through members, and you can see that reflected there. Also, other unions and central labor bodies. I'm just going to check my time. We laugh when a member says, I don't really need the union. I can stand up to the boss on my own. We say, what kind of fool? What kind of fool would think that? And there are labor leaders who will say, what an idiot. How could anyone be so stupid as to think they could stand up to the power of the boss on their own? And some of those leaders will actually turn and say, maybe not publicly but privately, but my union, we're tough. We can take the system on all by ourselves. We don't need those other unions. We don't need a labor movement because we got our own thing here. And you know what? That thinking is no more enlightened than the member who doesn't understand the need for a union. Because in some ways we have a labor movement. Did I make my point clearly there? Because in some ways in Canada we have a labor movement, but in other ways we have sort of a federations of unions. We've got a job to do to build a labor movement, and CUPW can play an important role in that, and CUPW can use this campaign in the course of building this campaign, can revitalize the labor movement. Because, you know, for labor to get behind you, you need to be doing what you're doing right now, which is you're hauling out the flag. You're saying, we're going to fight this. And when you're fighting, people can get behind you. Make sure you ask for the help. Make sure you network for the help. This campaign right now, before the federal election, before the writ is dropped, this campaign should be the #1 job of the labor movement in Canada. Because it can bring down Harper. It's actually, you know, the CLC has its 4 themes, child care and old age, you know, like retirement security and everything else. And those are absolutely important and vital, and I agree with them. But this issue of door-to-door mail delivery, it's gritty. People can get their head around it. And it's a wedge issue. There's conservatives, lots of them. I was canvassing in Etobicoke, door after door after door. This isn't like going door to door saying, we should get Canada out of NATO, and I would like to have a discussion with you about getting Canada out of NATO. You know, this is about door-to-door mail delivery. And guess what? They all want it. Almost all of them want it. If they don't want it for themselves, they want it for their aunt or the old lady across the fence or something. And I want to say something about messaging. Demonstrating confidence in our message. We all know about the member who has a problem being late. And many of us have been at hearings with a member. They've been late for the 29th time. Their job's on the line. And how many excuses do they have for being late? 10, 15, 29? I don't have time to rattle them all off, but boy, have they ever got a lot of excuses. Why? Because they don't have a case. And so a caution that I would make to you about messaging is demonstrate confidence in your core message. And your core message is this. Let me take this thing. Prime Minister Stephen Harper plans to stop mail delivery to your home. He wants you to travel to a community mailbox like this to get your mail. Now here's a little, you know, community mailboxes are a major eyesore, etc. The local insisted I added that. I didn't even think we needed it where we first produced this. Ask your MP, Ted Opitz, to speak out clearly and publicly to save door-to-door mail delivery. And it's not too late to save door-to-door mail delivery. I mean, that's your message. I think that's your key message. It's about that service. And I know you can back up the business plan, the new Canada Post, and all of those things. But I would suggest to you that you are strongest. If somebody wants to talk about that, you can talk about it. You're strongest when you paint a clear picture for people about what it will be like to have to go to that community mailbox. Because most of them have never had that experience before. They don't even know if there's going to be any mail in there. They're going to troop off, open it up. Oh, not here yet. So what do? Wait 3 days to find out if that book's coming from Amazon or not? You know, I don't know. Yes, question? Sorry, I thought I told you.
But on the flip side of that, we already do have some community boxes, and so when you knock on those people's doors, what's the argument? You know, because I don't think Canada Post is going to take those away,
Okay.
the ones that are already there.
So I would say to you, we've got to be strategic about where we put our resources. And I think we want to be, I'm just talking me, eh? So you'll do what you'll do. I think we definitely are going to get a more sympathetic hearing in communities that stand to lose it. We're going to get a more sympathetic hearing. We can only knock on so many doors. Okay. So let me just check my notes. Sorry. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, we're now in a key period. You've all got a copy of this ad folded up. That's in a tabloid. So in Toronto, we have an enormous city. And so what I proposed is that we use, and I've used this tactic before around a big fight at the Toronto District School Board. We use, and you don't have that kind of problem in a place like London, but in Toronto, if you put an ad in the Toronto newspaper attacking all Conservative MPs in the GTA, you get, to put their name in. You don't get to put their picture in. And so what we do is we use weeklies, Scarborough Mirror, Etobicoke Guardian, etc. And we're able to point the finger right at these people. Because a big part of our job right now is connecting the dots. Because it is possible to win the battle of public opinion resoundingly and lose the campaign. It's true for unions too. There's unions pouring gazillions of dollars right now into improving their public image. Well, you can have a really good public image and lose every strike. It helps you to have a good public image, but that doesn't necessarily translate into winning the strike unless you go out and figure out how to win the strike. Are you operating in better conditions? Yes, you are operating in better conditions. So this is strategy. We're talking strategy here. So a key piece right now is connecting the dots for people. We're talking, let me hold this please. We're talking about this guy, Ted. That's what they call him in Etobicoke, Ted. We're talking about Ted. And people say, Ted wants to take away our mail delivery? Yeah. Never mind the argument about whether Canada Post is a crown corporation or a duly whatever. These guys are who's responsible. People don't realize that their Conservative MP is responsible for what's going on. And that they can save their door-to-door delivery in the next election. This coming federal election, I'll come to you in one sec, brother. This coming federal election is the decisive, if you want to talk about campaign timeline and strategy, I would say to you, this federal election is what it's all about for this campaign. Because one of the things about, to go back to that discussion about the legacy of that post-war period of history, we came to believe that politics was about rational discussion. And it worked for us to a large extent. But the truce is over. That truce is over. They're going for our throats. The shells are landing all around us. A lot of people forgot there was ever anybody on the other side of the hill who wanted to do us harm. They think it's a scary thought. So we have a job to do now to take the Conservatives down. And there are a lot of unions that don't really get involved in politics. And we have one set of excuses on the right. On the right, people say, unions shouldn't be involved in politics. And on the left, we've got our bandana, we got our armband, we got our buttons, and we don't get involved in bourgeois politics. That's a sham, and don't vote, they're all the same. I've been there, 2, 4, 6, 8, organize and smash the state, whoop-de-doo. And it feels fantastic. But we have a job to do to wade into unfamiliar territory for many of us and get involved in these elections. Because getting members involved in going after these Conservative MPs, an absolute priority. And do you know what I found? I don't know what you found here, but that material, you know, with the pointing the finger at the head of that MP, it excited people. I don't know if you found that here, but people said, oh yeah, okay, now I really get what we're doing. This looks like something that's gonna work. Now I know what our job is. Our job is to take that person down. That's the kind of thinking we have to be into. This isn't about winning a big discussion or coming up with a better business plan. This is about defeating our opponents who want to hurt us. That's how they think about us. That's the mindset we have to be in. And we got to go to our members and say, hey, you know what? You may hate politics, but guess what? We can save all these jobs. We can save our union. We can save the Postal Service if we get involved in politics. And part of it right now is this door-to-door. There's no spending limits now. And we've got, we're not competing with candidates' campaigns. You know what happens when the candidates start campaigning? Half the people who are involved in politics, they're not going to be involved in the CUPW campaign. They're going to be off canvassing for a candidate. So now is the time to get people out there. And it may be 9-10 weeks, it may be 9-10 months, I don't know. But this is the time to go for it. And also to increase the number of people who, for the first time in their lives, are going to get involved in an election campaign. And I don't care how you get them out there, fighting for whatever candidate you think you want to win. And there will be some people who will just want to continue saying, not the Tory. Tell them you hate politics too. Tell them whatever you need to tell them. Get them out there. Yes, brother.
I agree with you completely that the photo and the name is very important. The dot, and you talked about connecting the dots, that's missing for me is there's no way on those ads to contact the local campaign. So if I'm pissed off about this, I write to Ed Holder, or Susan Truppitt, if the majority manager needs to put another writing. They have full-time staff to take all of our cards and put them in the blue box, right, and ignore people's input. To empower that person, they have to get, they're not gonna, well, I'm not sure. It doesn't seem to me they're gonna call a 1-800 number or go to a website and look up an email somebody, which will eventually get back to the folks working in their community. So that ad for me has to say, if you're worked up about this, because you're right, it does get people angry, it's great, it gets people passionate. There's people in your community who you can meet face to face and work on this with. And that's the piece that we're trying to do here from the other side. But any of these ad pieces, whoever they go out, in weeklies and on doorsteps and mail drops, etc., need to connect us in the community. It can't move out of the community and come back, and it has to have a mail-in, phone-in, email-in, something in piece so that a local campaign can contact that now worked up, impassioned, hopefully engaged person.
Yeah. I hear you loud and clear, and you have a broader group than this in London, right? You have it. And so you've got something to attach people to. I'll tell you frankly, in Toronto, right now, they don't. So you put that phone number on, it's real, you can do something with it. Maybe they should have that number as well. My experience, mostly people don't phone. You know, I don't know what your experience is. We're mostly discrediting. I agree with you, organization building if we can do it. In Toronto, they're working to get enough of their members out, and they're starting to get a return on this, to get enough of their members out, to get a campaign going that they can get people behind. So I know in Toronto, I think in London, I think we added the local office number to I think your piece has the local CUPW office number. Yes?
About this bulletin as well, I think it should say there, these two men voted to close door-to-door service because it was a unanimous vote in the House to end door-to-door service. It shouldn't say let them speak up. They've spoken. They voted to close it. And it should say that. And it should say all of them unanimously voted to destroy the door-to-door service. To hell with us, get them to speak up. They're never going to speak up. They've already spoken.
So it's, you know, it's a question. I don't disagree with you, and there's pros and cons of doing it different ways. The idea here is that we create an expectation that we actually run two sets. The first set says they should speak out. And then the second set, it's this message. Conservative Member of Parliament Balgosal has not spoken out publicly to save door-to-door mail delivery. Does he deserve your support in the next election? So that's what we're trying to do, create an expectation that they should speak out on behalf of their constituents, because people want door-to-door mail delivery. And then this second round says they failed to do it. So, you know, it's all judgment call. It's all about trying to, how do we engage people? Now, I hesitate to mention this because, you know, there's certain things, I agree social media is important, but I often don't mention social media because often that's all we talk about. And it's the same with polling. Now I gotta watch my time, I got 5 minutes. We've got funding from CUPW National to do a poll. We haven't figured it out yet, but we're going to be able to, once we get the first poll set up, we're going to be able to do telephone polls in a riding for $1,000, which is not a huge amount of money. And it'll be a well-designed poll, and some of these polls we may not be able to use because the numbers won't be good enough. But I think most of them, in most cases, we'll be able to use these polls. And so another thing we'll add to this mix is so-and-so, so-and-so has not listened to the constituents, the vast majority of the people of London, whatever it is, West or something, want to protect door-to-door mail delivery. Quick question, brother, then I got to wrap. Yes?
Could you put a
Yes,
thing in
George,
the
sorry.
newspaper, you go to the different candidates and say they were asked what they want to do with it, so that they're all compared on the same thing that you put in the newspaper, so that they can show the Conservatives said no, that they're not supporting it, NDP says yes, yeah, so that they shamed into it.
Yeah. There's been an important development, which is that the NDP has said that they're going to not only do a moratorium and hold public consultations, but that if the people in a riding in that public consultation determine that they want to restore the mail delivery, that they're going to restore it. That's very, very important to us. This has just recently happened. So this is very, very important to us, and it's going to give us a leverage with the Liberals. Because throwing the Tories out and then getting the Liberals in, who are the most likely to form the next government, isn't going to do us a whole hell of a lot of good if Justin just has another bunch of really good conversations through these public consultations. We've got to make sure that, anyways, I won't go on. George.
Yeah, just a couple of things. You mentioned Justin Trudeau. Alain Robitaille, who's here from Montreal, he's doing work on blitzing Trudeau's riding of Papineau with community newspaper ads, and then we're following up with how many? 27,000 cards have been going to all the constituents in residences in Papineau, because the Liberals aren't taking this seriously. So we're driving it home right into Trudeau's riding.
Great.
The other thing I wanted to comment on that toll-free number on there, because it's interesting how the members of the public react to addresses, phone numbers, emails. But we have a person working full-time in Ottawa monitoring that phone number.
Yeah.
And we're getting a load of calls. We know when someone's been doing a canvass someplace in the country, because there's a huge spike in the number of messages that are left.
Great.
So it does work. And when you were doing, you did the canvass in Scarborough, Toronto, the red light was blinking constantly for about 48 hours.
I'm very happy to hear it, because often that doesn't happen. So that's just another indication of the power of this issue.
And we follow up with every person who calls.
That's great.
Can we write some of these suggestions down, because we've got some time this afternoon to discuss among ourselves some strategies, and that might be a really good jumping off point. Is it okay if I do that?
I'm
If I
going to
just write
wrap,
stuff-
and then you
I'm
can.
gonna be quiet
yeah,
and
yeah.
write stuff behind you? Thanks.
This is, it's in your kit. It's called Checklist for Local Unions, and this is about the federal election. And this for locals that haven't been involved a lot in electoral politics before, this will be useful. Now, it's written in Toronto for Toronto, but a lot of it is, applies. A lot of it's generic. So there's really a lot that can be done with your membership list. I won't go on. I would encourage you to read this before you go into your afternoon conversations. You might want to have somebody read it out, because I think that, this federal election could come up on quite short notice, and I believe there's things on here that would help you prepare for that. And brother, the material from Montreal, I would love to see it. I gave you my card earlier. Please send it to me, and it's very exciting. And we've got a whole new opportunity now with this, the NDP taking a better position, because it's going to create more pressure on the Liberals. I have to go. So I would just like to, was this a discussion that you think is useful to you?
Absolutely.
Oh, wow. You did a great job.
Yes, brother?
Rob, obviously our campaign is national in scope.
Yeah.
The amount of material that is out there with newspaper and overwhelming.
Yeah.
We've spoken in regards to gathering that information and to localize it so that everybody's familiar with what is going on from coast to coast to coast.
Yeah.
So, do you have any ideas as how we could effectively gather that information in such a way that it's not overwhelming, like for our locals, for our campaign folks, our people who are door to door, it's voluminous.
Okay.
Can I just cut you off there? That's
Sure.
already happened. It's being collected by Rochelle in Ottawa, and she's cataloging it by region and province and everything. So if you can get a hard copy, and I have to do 800 emails, so we can talk about it.
But I do have a suggestion. This is a perfect application for a website. Because in a website, you can feature information and then have people go deeper, So that the website should be like a newspaper. The website, this is a separate website from the website we invite the public to. This is a campaign website I was talking about earlier, campaign news, campaign people. You go on there, this is working for us, what do you think, etc. And then people can go in deeper. There's a little story about what they're doing in Vancouver, but if you want to click on Vancouver, you can click on Vancouver, and then you actually get copies of the ads, the leaflets, etc. that they're using. Little video clips. Take pictures of what you're doing. I'm sure you are. Do video clips of what you're doing. So I've really enjoyed being with you. I'm so sorry to have to rush off. I really enjoyed the discussion. I hope it was useful to you. I'm not that far away. It's only a couple hours, and I hope we get a chance to talk again. And I wish you success in London and everywhere with Cup W. This is my main focus right now. As long as John Cartwright, the head of the Labour Council in Toronto, wants to pay me to put my energy into the Cup W campaign, I'll be able to continue to do it in a major way. Otherwise, I'll be mostly knocking on doors. So, best of luck to you all. Best wishes.
Thank
you. Also for our appreciation for your time and effort to help us fight and save door-to-door delivery throughout Canada. So,
thank you very much. Thank you. Indigo, see, how to be a genius. I can Thanks, I'll just tidy up here my stuff, and safe trip. Good to meet you all.
Okay, so I'm going to call up Dean and Lisa from the London Local, as well as Wendy from Londoners for Door-to-Door to do a brief presentation on the campaign. Take a few minutes of break. Oh, you want to take a small break?
Everyone have a break and have some coffee and tea and stuff.
Get the blood back to my heart. It's just a video, and so we'll go ahead and say, that was great, awesome information. We'll find out if everyone wants to share it. See you later.